Here's your lunch. Excuse me, ma'am, this doesn't look fresh. They look fresh to me.
By 2 p.m. she'd be out of a job. By 3 p.m. the whole school would know why. This is the story of how one plate of moldy food brought down an entire system. Picture this: a high school cafeteria erupting into absolute chaos. Students have their phones out, recording everything. Security guards are escorting a lunch lady out of the building while she's screaming that this isn't fair, that she's done nothing wrong. The principal's voice crackles over the intercom, urgent and stressed. All staff report to the auditorium immediately. Not in 10 minutes. Not after lunch. Immediately. And in the center of it all, frozen in that moment, is the face of a woman who thought she was untouchable. A woman who'd worked at this school for 18 years and believed that gave her the right to treat students however she wanted. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how everything fell apart so spectacularly, we need to rewind. Back to that same morning when everything seemed normal. When nobody knew that by the end of the day the entire school would be turned upside down. Let's start with Maya Thompson. 16 years old, junior at Riverside High, and the girl at the center of everything that was about to happen. Maya wasn't the type to cause trouble. In fact, she was exactly the opposite. She lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment with her grandmother, Gloria, in the part of town where rent was just barely manageable. Maya was a scholarship student, which meant she worked twice as hard as everyone else just to stay in the same place. While other kids were out on weekends, Maya was studying, maintaining the grades that kept her scholarship intact and her future possible. But Maya had a passion that went beyond just grades and survival. She loved photography. Not the selfie kind, not the Instagram aesthetic kind, but real documentary photography. The kind that told stories about people the world preferred not to see. She dreamed of becoming a photojournalist who could document social justice issues, who could make people pay attention to the injustices happening right in front of them. Her camera was her most prized possession, a used Canon her grandmother had saved up for 2 years to buy her. Maya carried it everywhere, always looking for the truth hiding in plain sight. That morning started like any other. Her alarm went off at 6:15. She got ready quietly so she wouldn't wake her grandmother, who worked night shifts as a nursing assistant and needed every minute of sleep she could get. Maya made herself toast, checked her camera bag, and was waiting outside when her best friend Jasmine pulled up at 7:20 in her mom's old Honda. Jasmine was Maya's opposite in all the best ways. Where Maya was quiet and observant, Jasmine was loud and animated. Where Maya watched, Jasmine acted. They'd been inseparable since freshman year when Jasmine had defended Maya against a senior who tried to steal her camera. That kind of loyalty meant everything to Maya. As they drove to school that morning, they were talking about the photography competition coming up. It was sponsored by the local newspaper, and the winner would get a $5,000 scholarship and a summer internship. Maya had been working on a photo essay about inequality in their community, capturing images of the divide between the wealthy side of town and neighborhoods like hers. Jasmine was hyping her up, telling her she was definitely going to win, that her work was better than anything else that would be submitted. Maya smiled but stayed humble. That was her way. She never wanted to draw too much attention to herself. She'd learned early that being quiet, being agreeable, being invisible often made life easier. Especially for a black girl in a school where she was one of only a handful in most of her classes. It wasn't that she was scared. Her late mother had been a community activist, someone who'd spoken truth to power until the day she died when Maya was 12. Maya had inherited that fire, but she'd learned to bank it, to let it burn steady and low rather than blazing for everyone to see. When they arrived at Riverside High, Maya greeted a few people in the hallway. A nod here, a smile there. People knew her, liked her even, but she kept her circle small. She went to her locker, grabbed her books for morning classes, and headed to first period. It was a completely ordinary morning. Nothing about it suggested that in a few hours, everything would change. Now, while Maya was having an ordinary morning, someone else was having a very different kind of day. Barbara Henderson, 52 years old, had been working in the Riverside High cafeteria for 18 years. 18 years of serving meals to teenagers who, in her opinion, were getting more disrespectful and entitled with each passing year. Barbara arrived at school every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, earlier than she technically needed to be there. She liked being first. She liked being in control of her domain. That morning, as she unlocked the cafeteria and turned on the industrial lights, she was already complaining. Complaining about the mess from the day before. Complaining about how kids these days didn't appreciate anything. Complaining about how the world was changing in ways she didn't like and didn't understand. Barbara had a way of seeing herself as a victim, as someone the world was constantly wronging, even though she was the one in a position of power over hundreds of students every single day. When the other cafeteria workers started arriving, the tension was immediately obvious. Maria Rodriguez, a 38-year-old mother of three who'd been working alongside Barbara for 5 years, came in carrying a clipboard. She'd been documenting something she knew Barbara wouldn't want to hear. Maria approached carefully, diplomatically, the way you approach someone you know might explode. She pointed out that several items in the walk-in refrigerator were past their expiration dates. Not by a day or two but by a week, some even longer. The chicken, specifically, had dates that were concerning. They needed to dispose of it and put in an order for fresh inventory. It was a simple food safety issue, the kind of thing that should have been routine. But Barbara's face hardened immediately. She didn't even look at the clipboard. She just waved Maria off dismissively, telling her that those dates were suggestions, not rules. That they couldn't afford to throw out perfectly good food just because of some arbitrary date stamped on a package. That Maria was being dramatic, and if she didn't like how things were run, she could find another job. Maria stood there for a moment, wanting to push back, wanting to insist. She had 3 kids at home who depended on her paycheck. She couldn't afford to lose this job, and Barbara knew it. That's how power works in these small, everyday situations. It's not always about big dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it's about a look, a tone, an unspoken threat that keeps people silent. So Maria backed down like she'd backed down a dozen times before. But this time, she took her phone out when Barbara wasn't looking and photographed those expiration dates. Just in case. Just in case one day the truth needed to come out. Here's something you need to understand about Barbara Henderson. Her discrimination wasn't loud and obvious. It wasn't cross burnings or slurs shouted in hallways. It was quieter than that, more insidious. It was in the portions she served, smaller scoops for certain students. It was in her tone, warm and grandmotherly for some kids, cold and dismissive for others. It was in the way her whole demeanor would shift depending on who was standing in front of her. Barbara had her reasons, or at least she told herself she did. Her daughter hadn't gotten into her first-choice college 3 years ago. A scholarship had gone to someone else, someone Barbara believed was less qualified. She blamed affirmative action. She blamed changing standards. She blamed everything except the possibility that maybe her daughter simply wasn't the best candidate. That bitterness had calcified inside her, had turned into something uglier with each passing year. And she had protection. Her best friend was Donna Clark, the vice principal. They'd both been at Riverside High for nearly 2 decades, part of what they considered the old guard. They'd have coffee together every morning before school started, sitting in Clark's office and talking about how different things used to be. How standards had slipped. How discipline had gotten too soft. They spoke in code, but the meaning was always clear. When complaints about Barbara came up, and they did come up, Clark made sure they went nowhere. A student says the lunch lady was rude? Kids are oversensitive these days. A parent calls about portions seeming unequal? It's a busy lunch line, sometimes servings vary. Every excuse, every deflection, Clark provided it. Because in her mind, Barbara was good people. Someone she could trust. Someone from a time when things made sense. As the morning went on and lunch period approached, Barbara moved through her routine. She wasn't thinking about Maya Thompson. She didn't know that name, wouldn't have recognized the face. Maya was just another student in the endless stream of students, someone who would move through her line and be forgotten 5 seconds later. Barbara had no idea that this would be the last normal day she'd ever have at Riverside High. The lunch bell rang at 11:45. The cafeteria, which had been echoing and empty, suddenly flooded with bodies and noise. Hundreds of students poured in, creating that specific chaos that only a high school lunch period can produce. Different friend groups claimed their usual tables. The social hierarchy of Riverside High was on full display. Athletes at certain tables, theater kids at others, the various cliques and crowds all sorting themselves in that unspoken but universally understood system. Maya and Jasmine got in line together, still talking about the photography competition. Jasmine was animated, using her hands to describe the photos Maya should submit. Maya was listening but also observing, her photographer's eye always working. She noticed the way light came through the cafeteria windows. The way different groups interacted. The way certain kids looked comfortable and others looked like they were just trying to survive until the bell rang. The lunch line moved slowly as it always did. Maya and Jasmine shuffled forward, trays in hand. Maya watched as students ahead of her got their food. Fresh-looking portions of chicken, vegetables that looked properly cooked, sides that seemed appetizing enough given that this was school cafeteria food. The lunch ladies were efficient, moving students through quickly. Then Maya reached Barbara Henderson's station. The change was immediate and unmistakable. Barbara's face, which had been neutral, almost pleasant with the previous students, went cold. Her eyes flicked over Maya in a way that made Maya's stomach tighten even before anything happened. It was a look Maya had seen before in various places, though she could never quite name what it meant. Just that it meant something. Something not good. Barbara reached for a plate and served Maya her food. But this wasn't the same food the other students had gotten. The chicken looked different, darker, with a texture that seemed off. The vegetables were wilted. The portions were noticeably smaller. Maya stood there for a moment, looking down at her tray, trying to figure out if she was imagining things or if this was really as bad as it looked. She decided to say something. Politely. Carefully. Maya wasn't confrontational by nature, but she also wasn't going to accept food that looked spoiled. She spoke quietly, respectfully, asking if maybe she could have a different plate, that this one didn't look quite right. It was the most reasonable request in the world. Any decent person would have looked, seen the issue, and switched out the plate. Barbara's response was ice cold. She said that this is what they had. Take it or leave it. The tone wasn't just dismissive. It was hostile. It was the tone you use when you want someone to know they're not worth your time or consideration. Maya felt Jasmine stiffen beside her. Felt the students behind them in line starting to pay attention. But Maya stayed calm. She picked up the plate to look at it more closely, and that's when she saw it. Green mold. Actual visible mold on the chicken. Not a little spot that could be mistaken for seasoning. Unmistakable mold that meant this food was not just old but actively spoiled. Maya's heart started beating faster, but she kept her voice steady. She showed the plate to Barbara calmly and said that she thought it might be spoiled, pointing to the mold. And that's when Barbara exploded. Her voice got loud, cutting through the cafeteria noise. She said that you people always complain. You people. Those two words hung in the air like a slap. She said there was nothing wrong with the food, that Maya was just being difficult, just looking for something to complain about like always. Maya felt her face getting hot. She could feel every eye in the cafeteria turning toward them. She could see phones starting to come out, students sensing that something was happening, something they'd want to have recorded. This was 2024. Everything got recorded. Everything went viral. Barbara kept going. She said that if Maya didn't like the food here, maybe she should bring lunch from home. Then she paused, looked Maya up and down with pure contempt and added, "Oh wait, can you afford that?" The cafeteria went dead silent for a moment. Then came the gasps. The whispered "oh my gods." The shocked reactions rippling out from the lunch line. Because everyone had heard it. Everyone understood what had just been said and what it meant. This wasn't about food anymore. This was about something much uglier. Maya felt frozen. Humiliated in front of hundreds of students. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to say something back but couldn't find words. All her life, she'd been taught to keep her head down, to not make waves, to survive these moments by staying quiet. So she tried to walk away, tried to just remove herself from the situation. But Barbara wasn't done. She reached out and grabbed Maya's arm. Actually grabbed her, her fingers digging in. She said that she'd given Maya food and Maya was going to eat it or throw it away herself. That she wasn't going to waste school property. The grip was tight enough to hurt, tight enough to leave marks. Maya pulled her arm back instinctively, jerking away from the touch. The moldy food still on the tray went flying. It hit the floor with a wet splat, chicken and vegetables scattering across the cafeteria tile. The mold was visible to everyone now. Undeniable. Disgusting. Exactly what Maya had tried to point out. Barbara's face went red with rage. She started yelling that Maya was destroying school property. That someone needed to teach her respect. That she was out of control. Her voice was getting louder and louder and students were recording everything now. Multiple phones, multiple angles, capturing every word, every moment. Jasmine stepped forward, trying to defend Maya, but Barbara turned on her too. Other students started protesting, saying they'd seen what happened, that Barbara had served Maya bad food and then grabbed her. But Barbara was beyond reason now. She was screaming about disrespect, about how kids today had no manners, about how she'd been working there 18 years and wouldn't be treated this way. And that's when Vice Principal Donna Clark appeared. She'd been in her office when someone had run to tell her there was a situation in the cafeteria. She walked in to see Barbara yelling, Maya standing there with tears in her eyes but refusing to let them fall, food on the floor, and dozens of students with their phones out filming everything. Clark's reaction was immediate and telling. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't look at the evidence on the floor. She looked at Barbara, her friend, and then looked at Maya with an expression that said she'd already decided who was at fault. She told Maya to come with her. Not asked. Told. Her voice was sharp and final. When Jasmine tried to explain what had really happened, Clark cut her off and told everyone to get back to their lunches. The show was over. But it wasn't over. Not even close. It was just beginning. As Clark walked Maya out of the cafeteria, students were already uploading videos. Already texting. Already calling their parents. The story was spreading in real time, moving through the school like wildfire. Within 10 minutes, everyone at Riverside High knew something big had happened. Within 20 minutes, parents knew. Within an hour, local news stations would have the videos. But right then, in that moment, Maya walked down the hallway to the vice principal's office with her head held high even though her hands were shaking. She'd done nothing wrong. She knew that. But she also knew that doing nothing wrong didn't always protect you. Her grandmother had taught her that. Her late mother had lived that truth. What Maya didn't know yet was that this moment, this terrible, humiliating moment, was going to change everything. Not just for her, but for every student who'd ever been treated poorly by Barbara Henderson. For every staff member who'd stayed silent. For an entire system that had protected the wrong people for far too long. Maya sat in the chair outside Vice Principal Clark's office, her hands folded in her lap, trying to keep them from shaking. Through the glass window of the office door, she could see Clark on the phone, pacing back and forth, her face set in that expression adults get when they've already made up their minds about something. Maya didn't need to hear the conversation to know what was being said. She was the problem. She was the troublemaker. She was the one who'd caused a scene in the cafeteria. Never mind that she'd been served moldy food. Never mind that she'd been grabbed. Never mind that she'd been humiliated in front of the entire school. None of that seemed to matter to Vice Principal Clark, who hadn't asked Maya a single question about what actually happened. She'd simply looked at the situation, seen her friend Barbara upset, and decided that Maya must be at fault. This is how these things work, how they've always worked. When there's a conflict between someone with power and someone without it, the person with power gets the benefit of the doubt. They get their story heard first, believed first, protected first. Maya knew this intellectually, her grandmother had taught her, but knowing it and experiencing it were two very different things. Clark finally hung up the phone and opened her office door. Her expression was stern, the look of someone who believed they were about to deliver necessary discipline. She told Maya that she'd called her grandmother, that Gloria Thompson was on her way to the school. She said it like it was a threat, like the involvement of a parent was supposed to make Maya more scared, more compliant. Maya tried to explain what had happened. She kept her voice calm and respectful, laid out the facts clearly. She'd been served food with visible mold. She'd politely asked for a different plate. Barbara Henderson had responded with hostility and discriminatory comments. Barbara had physically grabbed her. The food had fallen because Maya was pulling away from that unwanted touch. These were simple facts, things that could be verified by dozens of witnesses and multiple video recordings. But Clark wasn't interested in facts. She cut Maya off mid-sentence and said something that would stick with Maya for a long time. She said that Mrs. Henderson had been working at Riverside High longer than Maya had been alive. The implication was clear. Barbara's tenure, her years of service, mattered more than Maya's truth. Experience trumped evidence. Loyalty to staff trumped protection of students. Clark continued, saying that she understood Maya was upset, but causing a disruption in the cafeteria, raising her voice, creating a scene, that wasn't acceptable behavior. Maya tried to interject, to point out that she hadn't raised her voice, that Barbara had been the one yelling, but Clark held up a hand to silence her. The conversation was over before it had really begun. Maya was told to sit outside the office and wait for her grandmother. Clark disappeared back into her office, and Maya sat there feeling that particular kind of powerless frustration that comes from not being heard. From having your reality completely dismissed by someone who's supposed to protect you. And then, through the glass panels that separated the office area from the main hallway, Maya saw something that made her stomach turn. Barbara Henderson was walking down the hall toward the administrative offices. Vice Principal Clark stepped out to meet her. And they laughed together. Actually laughed. Clark put a hand on Barbara's shoulder in a gesture of reassurance. They spoke in low voices, too quiet for Maya to hear, but their body language said everything. They were friends. Allies. They were on the same side and Maya was on the other. Back in the cafeteria, Jasmine was furious. After Clark had taken Maya away, Jasmine had tried to tell other students what really happened, but the lunch monitors were telling everyone to sit down and eat. Return to your tables. Stop recording. Delete those videos. But high school students don't work that way, especially not in 2024 when everyone has a smartphone and everything gets documented. Jasmine found Marcus Williams in the cafeteria. Marcus was a senior student council president, the kind of kid who adults actually listened to because he was articulate and polite and knew how to navigate the system. If anyone could help, it was Marcus. She grabbed him and quickly explained everything, showed him one of the videos that had already been shared in group chats. Marcus watched the video, his expression getting darker with each second. He could see it all clearly. The way Barbara's demeanor changed when Maya reached her station. The discriminatory comment about affording to bring lunch from home. The physical grab. The moldy food on the floor that nobody could deny. This wasn't a he said she said situation. This was documented fact. Marcus told Jasmine he was going to the office to speak with Clark, to make sure the administration understood what had actually happened. He left the cafeteria and walked purposefully toward the administrative wing, the kind of walk that said he had important business and shouldn't be questioned. When he reached the office area, he saw Maya sitting outside Clark's office, looking small and defeated in a way that made him angry. He knocked on Clark's door and entered before being invited. He said that students were talking about what happened in the cafeteria, that there were serious concerns about discrimination and food safety, that this needed to be addressed properly. He was respectful but firm, using the diplomatic skills that had gotten him elected to student council. Clark looked at him with barely concealed annoyance. She appreciated that Marcus was concerned, she said, but this was an administrative matter being handled appropriately. Students should focus on their education and let adults handle adult situations. Marcus tried to push back, tried to say that students had a right to feel safe and respected in their school, but Clark cut him off the same way she'd cut off Maya. She told him to return to class. That was it. Discussion over. Marcus stood there for a moment, frustrated, realizing that the normal channels weren't going to work here. Clark wasn't interested in hearing the truth. She'd already decided how this was going to go. As Marcus left the office, defeated for the moment but not defeated permanently, someone else was watching the situation unfold. Mr. David Chin, a 28-year-old English teacher in his third year at Riverside High, had been in the cafeteria during the incident. He'd been sitting at a table in the corner, grading papers during his lunch period, and he'd witnessed part of what happened. He hadn't seen the initial interaction with the food, but he'd heard Barbara's raised voice. He'd heard the comment about affording lunch. He'd seen the grab. He'd seen the food hit the floor. Chin was young enough to still remember what it felt like to be a powerless student, but old enough to understand how institutions protected themselves. He knew that speaking up could make his life difficult, that he was untenured and therefore vulnerable, but he also knew that staying silent made him complicit. So he walked to Vice Principal Clark's office, knocked and entered. He told Clark that he'd witnessed the incident and that he was concerned about what he'd seen. He said that Barbara's behavior had been inappropriate and that Maya shouldn't be the one being disciplined. He spoke carefully, professionally, the way teachers learn to speak when they need to criticize the administration without getting fired. Clark's expression went cold. She thanked Mr. Chin for his input but said that he hadn't seen the entire incident from the beginning, that he didn't understand the full context. That Maya had been disrespectful first, had created a confrontation. Chin tried to argue, tried to say that even if that were true, which he doubted, the response had been completely disproportionate and discriminatory. Clark stood up from her desk, using her physical presence to assert authority. She reminded Chin that he was still relatively new to Riverside High, that he should focus on his teaching and let experienced administrators handle disciplinary matters. It was a clear message: back off or there will be consequences. Chin left the office knowing he'd been warned, but also knowing he couldn't let this go. While this was happening in the administrative wing, something else was happening in the digital world. A student named Tyler Jenkins had posted one of the videos to the school's unofficial social media accounts. Not the official school pages, but the ones students actually followed and engaged with. The video had been filmed from a good angle, captured everything clearly. Barbara's cold demeanor. The moldy food. The cruel comment. The grab. All of it. Within minutes, the video had dozens of shares. Within 10 minutes, hundreds. Students were commenting, tagging friends, expressing shock and anger. But something else started happening too. Other students began coming forward with their own stories about Barbara Henderson. Stories that had been individual experiences, isolated incidents, suddenly became a pattern. A senior named Gloria Washington commented that Barbara had been giving her smaller portions all year. That she'd made comments about Keisha's hair, asking if it was real, calling it unprofessional for a school setting even though there was no dress code prohibiting natural black hairstyles. Keisha had never reported it because she figured nothing would happen, that it would just be her word against a longtime staff member, but seeing Maya's video gave her the courage to speak up. A junior named Ahmed Hassan shared that Barbara had repeatedly refused to accommodate his religious dietary needs. He was Muslim and didn't eat pork, something that was in his student file and something the cafeteria was supposed to accommodate. But Barbara would roll her eyes when he asked about ingredients, would make comments about special treatment, would serve him smaller portions of the alternative options available. He'd mentioned it to his parents, but they'd told him not to make trouble, to just bring lunch from home. So he had, but the humiliation had stayed with him. Carlos Martinez, a sophomore, tagged his older sister who'd graduated 2 years earlier. She commented saying that Barbara had treated her the same way, that she'd experienced similar discrimination but never reported it because she didn't think anyone would believe her or care. She said she was glad someone had finally caught it on video, that maybe now something would actually be done. The stories kept coming. A pattern emerging from what the administration had always treated as isolated incidents. Each story on its own could be dismissed as a misunderstanding, a personality conflict, a student being oversensitive. But together they formed something undeniable. This wasn't about one bad day or one misunderstanding. This was systemic. This was ongoing. This had been happening for years. Mr. Chin saw the video and the comments during his next class period. A student was watching it on their phone and Chin asked to see it. As he watched the full video and read through the dozens of stories in the comments, he realized the situation was much worse than he'd thought. This wasn't just about protecting Maya from unfair discipline. This was about exposing something that had been hidden in plain sight for years. He went to find Principal Matthews during his planning period. Matthews was the kind of principal who was more administrator than educator, more concerned with budgets and optics than with actual student welfare. But Chin figured he needed to know what was happening, that even Matthews couldn't ignore something this serious. The secretary in the main office told Chin that Principal Matthews was in meetings all morning with district representatives. Something about school funding, budget allocations, the kind of important financial discussions that determined whether programs got cut or teachers got raises. The secretary said he couldn't be disturbed unless it was an emergency. Chin asked if a viral video showing staff discrimination and food safety violations counted as an emergency. The secretary looked uncomfortable and said she'd pass along the message, but that Mr. Chin should probably wait until the meetings were done. It was clear that nothing was going to interrupt those budget discussions, not even a scandal brewing in real time on social media. At 11:45, exactly 1 hour after the cafeteria incident, Gloria Thompson's phone rang. She'd just finished her shift at the nursing home where she worked, was exhausted and looking forward to going home and sleeping before her next shift that evening. When she saw Riverside High on her caller ID, her heart immediately started racing. Schools don't call in the middle of the day unless something's wrong. Vice Principal Clark's voice came through the phone, professional but with an edge of irritation. She said that Maya had been involved in an incident in the cafeteria, that her behavior had been disruptive and disrespectful, that Gloria needed to come to the school immediately to discuss possible disciplinary action including suspension. Gloria, still groggy from a night of work, asked what exactly had happened. Clark gave a version of events that made Maya sound like the aggressor. She'd caused a scene, refused to accept the food she'd been given, raised her voice at a staff member, destroyed school property. Gloria listened to this version and knew immediately that something wasn't right. Her granddaughter wasn't perfect, but she wasn't a troublemaker. She didn't cause scenes. If Maya had reacted strongly to something, there was a reason. Gloria said she'd be there within 20 minutes and hung up. Then she called Maya's cell phone. Maya answered on the second ring, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. In whispered tones, because Clark's office door was open and she could hear, Maya told her grandmother what had really happened. The moldy food. The discriminatory comments. The physical grab. Gloria's exhaustion evaporated, replaced by a sharp, focused anger that came from decades of dealing with exactly this kind of situation. Gloria Thompson was 72 years old. She'd grown up in the South during integration, had attended newly integrated schools where she and the few other black students were treated as unwelcome intruders. She'd raised her daughter to be strong, to stand up for herself, and then she'd watched that daughter become an activist, fighting for justice in their community until cancer took her when Maya was 12. Gloria had promised her dying daughter that she'd raise Maya right, that she'd teach her to be strong but also to be safe, to pick her battles carefully because the world wasn't fair and sometimes you had to survive first and fight second. But this wasn't one of those times. This was a time to fight. Gloria got in her car and drove to Riverside High, her mind racing through everything she'd learned from decades of navigating racist institutions. She knew how these things worked. She knew that staying calm was essential, that losing your temper gave them an excuse to dismiss you as emotional, irrational. She knew that you had to ask the right questions, demand the right things, use their own procedures against them. She'd done this before, too many times before, and she'd do it again now for her granddaughter. When Gloria walked into Riverside High's administrative office 20 minutes later, she was composed, professional, dressed in her nursing scrubs because she hadn't had time to change. The secretary looked up and Gloria identified herself, said she was there to see Vice Principal Clark regarding her granddaughter Maya Thompson. Clark came out of her office, and the two women assessed each other in that quick, instinctive way that happens when people know they're about to be adversaries. Clark saw an elderly black woman in scrubs, probably exhausted from work, someone she could likely intimidate or rush through a meeting. Gloria saw a middle-aged white woman with 20 years of institutional power, someone who was used to people accepting her version of events without question. They were both wrong about each other. Clark led Gloria into her office. Maya was told to wait outside, which Gloria noted but didn't challenge yet. Pick your battles, know which hills to die on. Inside the office, Clark sat behind her desk, putting the physical barrier between them, another subtle power move. Gloria sat down and folded her hands in her lap, waiting. Clark started with her version of events, the same story she'd told on the phone. Maya had been disrespectful, had caused a disruption, had damaged school property. Gloria listened without interrupting, her face pleasant but her eyes sharp. When Clark finished, Gloria asked a simple question. What evidence did Clark have of this version of events? Clark seemed taken aback by the directness. She said there were witnesses, that Mrs. Henderson had given her account, that the food had been on the floor. Gloria nodded and asked to see the witness statements. Clark said they hadn't taken formal statements yet. Gloria asked if Clark had watched any of the videos that students had recorded. Clark's face tightened. She said student videos were not official documentation. Gloria let that sit for a moment, then asked another question. What about the food itself? Maya claimed it was moldy, visibly spoiled. Clark had said that was just an excuse, but had anyone actually examined the food? Could Gloria see it? Clark shifted in her chair, uncomfortable. She said the food had been disposed of, that cafeteria staff had cleaned up the mess. Gloria smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. She said how convenient that was. That the one piece of evidence that would prove Maya's account had been thrown away before anyone could examine it. She said she'd like to speak with Principal Matthews about this situation, that it seemed serious enough to warrant his attention. Clark said that Principal Matthews was in important meetings about the school's future, that he was dealing with district representatives and budget concerns. Gloria's response was immediate and sharp. She said that this was about the school's present, and more importantly about her granddaughter's future. That if the principal was too busy to address discrimination and food safety violations, then perhaps she needed to speak with someone higher up the chain. The two women locked eyes and Clark realized this wasn't going to be the easy meeting she'd expected. Gloria wasn't going to be intimidated or rushed. She wasn't going to accept Clark's version of events just because Clark had authority. This was going to be difficult. Gloria stood up and said she'd wait in the front office for Principal Matthews to be available, that she had all day if necessary. Clark tried to say that wasn't necessary, that they could resolve this right now, but Gloria was already walking out of the office. She sat down in a chair in the main office area, next to Maya, and took her granddaughter's hand. As they sat there, Gloria noticed a woman watching them from down the hallway. A woman in a cafeteria uniform standing near the corner, just staring. Gloria recognized her from Maya's description. Barbara Henderson. The woman who'd started all of this. Gloria stood up and started walking toward Barbara, wanting to speak with her directly, to hear her version, to look her in the eye. But Barbara saw Gloria coming and quickly turned around, walking rapidly back toward the cafeteria. She didn't want that conversation, didn't want to face the grandmother of the girl she'd humiliated. Gloria stood in the hallway watching Barbara retreat and understood something important. Barbara Henderson was a bully, and like most bullies, she was ultimately a coward. While this standoff was happening in the administrative office, students were organizing. Marcus Williams had created a group chat immediately after being dismissed from Clark's office. He'd added Jasmine, Tyler, who'd posted the video, and several other student leaders. The conversation was moving fast, dozens of messages about what to do, how to help Maya, how to make sure this didn't just get swept under the rug like so many things before. Jasmine had taken on the role of documenting everything. She was compiling all the videos from different angles, screenshotting the stories other students were sharing, creating a comprehensive record of not just today's incident but the pattern of behavior that had preceded it. She was methodical about it, organized, making sure nothing got lost. As they dug deeper, they discovered something disturbing. This wasn't the first time complaints had been filed about Barbara Henderson. Marcus accessed student council records and found references to concerns brought up over the past 3 years. Complaints about discriminatory treatment. Concerns about food quality. Reports of inappropriate comments. But every single one had gone nowhere. They'd been investigated by Vice Principal Clark and dismissed as misunderstandings or personality conflicts. The students realized they were looking at something bigger than one bad lunch lady. They were looking at a system that protected certain people regardless of what they did. A system where complaints disappeared into a black hole if the right person decided they weren't worth addressing. And that right person was Vice Principal Donna Clark, who was friends with Barbara Henderson and had been protecting her for years. While the students were making these discoveries, Maria Rodriguez was having a crisis of conscience. She'd been working in the cafeteria all morning, going through the motions, but the incident with Maya had shaken her. She'd watched Barbara serve that girl spoiled food. She'd seen the cruelty in it, and she'd known for a long time that Barbara did things like this. That she treated certain students differently. That she let food safety slide. That she created a hostile environment in that cafeteria. Maria had stayed silent because she needed her job. She had 3 kids at home, was a single mother, couldn't afford to lose her income. But today something had broken inside her. She kept thinking about that girl's face, about the humiliation, about the fact that it could have been one of her own children in that situation. About the fact that staying silent made her complicit in the cruelty. During her break, Maria did something risky. She left the cafeteria and went looking for the students she'd heard were organizing. She found Marcus and Jasmine in a corner of the library, laptops open, papers spread out, deep in planning mode. She approached carefully, nervously, and said she needed to talk to them. She told them everything. About the expired food she tried to report that morning. About the photos she'd been taking of expiration dates and improper storage. About the time she tried to speak up and been shut down by Barbara. About the retaliation threats if she made trouble. She pulled out her phone and showed them the pictures, clear evidence of food safety violations that had been ignored. Maria was crying as she spoke. She said she needed this job, that she had 3 kids depending on her, but that she couldn't stay silent anymore. That what had happened to Maya was wrong, and if there was any way she could help make it right, she would. Even if it cost her everything. The students looked at this woman who was risking her livelihood to do the right thing, and they understood that this moment was bigger than any of them had initially realized. This wasn't just about getting Maya out of trouble. This was about changing something fundamentally broken in their school. If you're watching this and you're as angry as these students were, hit that subscribe button. Because this story is about to get even more intense, and you won't want to miss what happens next. At that moment, Mr. Chin found them in the library. He'd been looking for the students who were organizing, had heard through the teacher grapevine that something was happening. He told them he wanted to help, that he'd witnessed part of the incident and had already tried to advocate for Maya with Clark. He said he knew this could be risky for him as an untenured teacher, but that sometimes doing the right thing meant making people uncomfortable. Together, this unlikely alliance started creating a plan. They would compile everything: the videos, the witness statements, the testimonies from other students, Maria's evidence of food safety violations, the documented history of dismissed complaints. They would present it to the school board as a comprehensive case that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. The problem was that the next school board meeting wasn't for 2 weeks. 2 weeks where Maya would be facing discipline, where Barbara would still be serving food, where the whole thing could be buried or forgotten once the initial outrage died down. Social media attention spans are short. School bureaucracies are designed to outlast protests and wait out anger. As they were grappling with this timing problem, Gloria appeared in the library doorway. She'd been walking around the school, refusing to leave, making her presence known and uncomfortable for the administration. She'd overheard students talking about what they were planning and had followed the conversation to the library. She introduced herself to the group, and there was a moment of mutual recognition. These students and this teacher and this cafeteria worker were fighting the same fight she'd been fighting her whole life. Different generations, same battle. Gloria listened to their plan about waiting for the school board meeting in 2 weeks and shook her head. She said that 2 weeks was too long. That momentum would be lost. That the administration would have time to craft their narrative, to make this all go away. She said they needed to handle this today. The students looked at this elderly woman in nursing scrubs and wondered how exactly they were supposed to make that happen. Gloria smiled, that same smile she'd given Clark earlier, the smile that said she'd been underestimated her entire life and it always turned out to be other people's mistake. She said she had some phone calls to make. That she knew people. That she'd been fighting institutional racism since before any of them were born, and she'd learned a few things along the way about how to make powerful people pay attention when they'd rather look away. Gloria pulled out her cell phone and stepped into the hallway. The students watched through the library windows as this grandmother, still in her work scrubs, exhausted from a night shift but energized by righteous anger, started making calls. They didn't know who she was calling or what she was saying, but they could see from her posture, from the way she was speaking, that she was activating something. Some network of relationships and obligations and old debts that existed outside the normal channels of school bureaucracy. Marcus turned to the others and asked the question they were all thinking. What would you do if you were in Maya's position right now? If you were sitting in that office, facing suspension for being the victim, knowing that the system was designed to protect the people who hurt you? Would you have the courage to fight back, or would you just try to make it through with as little damage as possible? Let me know in the comments what you would do, because that question is about to become central to everything that happens next. Because Gloria Thompson's phone calls were about to change everything. By the time she hung up from her last call, the carefully constructed protection that had kept Barbara Henderson safe for 18 years was starting to crack. And once it started cracking, it was going to shatter completely. The health inspector would arrive within the hour. The school board member would be there by 1 p.m. The local news had already picked up the story from social media. And Principal Matthews, who'd been in meetings all morning thinking he could ignore this problem until it went away, was about to discover that some problems don't go away. Some problems explode. Barbara Henderson had served moldy food to one girl. What she didn't know was that she'd also served a catalyst for everything that came next. Sometimes injustice is so clear, so documented, so undeniable that even systems designed to ignore it can't quite manage to look away. And this was about to become one of those times. At exactly 3:32 p.m., while Principal Matthews remained locked away in what was surely the world's longest administrative meeting, Gloria Washington pulled out her cell phone. She wasn't the type to sit around waiting for bureaucracy to catch up with common sense. Her fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency as she scrolled through her contacts, finding a name she hadn't called in nearly 6 months: Janet Price. Janet and Gloria went back 27 years. Back to when their kids played Little League together, back to potluck dinners and carpool schedules and the kind of friendship that survives even when life gets busy. More importantly, Janet Price was a senior health inspector with the county health department, and she picked up on the second ring. "Janet, honey, it's Gloria. I need a favor, and I need it today." Gloria's voice was calm but urgent, the tone of a woman who knew exactly what she was asking for. She explained the situation in precise detail: the moldy bread, the cafeteria workers' reaction, the administrator's dismissiveness, everything. On the other end of the line, Janet's voice shifted from friendly to professional in an instant. "Gloria, if there are food safety violations, I can do a surprise inspection today. I can be there in 45 minutes. The words were music to Gloria's ears. But she wasn't done. Gloria scrolled through her contacts again, this time finding Dr. Raymond Scott, school board member, retired pediatrician, and a family friend who'd known Maya since she was in diapers. When she explained what had happened, the shock in his voice was palpable. "Gloria, this is completely unacceptable. I'm coming to the school immediately. I want to see this situation firsthand." Dr. Scott wasn't just concerned. He was angry in that controlled, professional way that meant someone was about to face serious consequences. But Gloria's phone calls hadn't gone unnoticed. Assistant Principal Clark, who seemed to have a sixth sense for anything that might threaten his precious control over the situation, came striding across the cafeteria toward her. His face was set in what he probably thought was an intimidating expression: jaw tight, eyes narrowed, shoulders squared. He stopped directly in front of Gloria, invading her personal space in a way that was clearly meant to make her uncomfortable. "Mrs. Washington, I need you to stop making phone calls about school business. This is an internal matter." His voice had that edge of barely controlled authority, the kind men like him used when they expected immediate compliance. Gloria looked up at him slowly, deliberately, taking her time. She'd been a social worker in some of Chicago's toughest neighborhoods for 33 years. She'd stared down gangbangers, abusive parents, and corrupt city officials. Assistant Principal Richard Clark, with his cheap tie and his inflated sense of importance, didn't even register on her scale of intimidating. "I've dealt with much worse than you, honey," she said, her voice pleasant but with steel underneath. "And I'm making phone calls about my granddaughter's welfare, which is absolutely my business." Clark's face reddened. He took another step closer, lowering his voice to what he probably thought was a threatening whisper. "I can have you removed from this campus for disrupting school operations." Gloria actually smiled at that. Not a friendly smile, but the kind of smile that comes from decades of knowing how systems work and exactly where their weak points are. "I'd love to see you try," she said, her voice still perfectly calm. "I know my rights and I know you don't want more cameras on this situation. Because right now we have one phone recording what happened to my granddaughter. How many more do you think will show up if you forcibly remove a 62-year-old grandmother from campus for advocating for her family? How's that going to look on the evening news, honey?" Clark's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He hadn't expected resistance, certainly not this level of calculated, strategic resistance. He turned on his heel and stalked away, pulling out his own phone, undoubtedly to brief Principal Matthews on this latest problem. But Gloria didn't care. She'd made her calls and help was coming. While the administrative drama played out, Maya's friends had transformed into a remarkably efficient investigative team. Tyler Chin had disappeared into the library and returned with an armful of old yearbooks. Not recent ones but editions going back 12, 13, even 15 years. He spread them across one of the cafeteria tables, flipping through pages with increasing urgency. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a photo from 2013. There was Barbara Collins, younger but unmistakable, standing with the cafeteria staff. Tyler had been cross-referencing the yearbooks with old-school newspapers he'd found in the library's digital archives. "She's been here for 16 years. And look," he pulled up an article on his phone from the school's website, a piece about cafeteria improvements from 2018. In the comments section, buried under cheerful remarks about new menu options, was a complaint from a parent about discriminatory portion sizes. The comment had been dismissed by the school as unfounded. But Tyler had kept digging. He'd found another complaint from 2016, and another from 2019. All vague, all dismissed, but all pointing to the same person. Sarah had been working her own angle. She'd posted a carefully worded message in a Facebook group for Lincoln High alumni, asking if anyone remembered having issues with cafeteria staff. Within 20 minutes, she had a response that made everyone's blood run cold. A young woman named Aisha Thompson, now a sophomore at State University, sent a detailed message describing her experience at Lincoln High 4 years earlier. She talked about how Barbara would consistently give her smaller portions, how she'd make comments about being grateful for what you get, how she'd once thrown away Aisha's lunch tray because she claimed Aisha hadn't said, "thank you," properly. Aisha had complained to her counselor at the time, but nothing had come of it. The complaint had been logged as a personality conflict, and dismissed. The pattern wasn't just real, it was established, documented, and had been ignored for over a decade. At 3:58 p.m., Principal David Matthews finally emerged from his office. He was a tall man, late 50s, with graying hair and the kind of tired eyes that suggested he'd been in education too long. Clark had already briefed him, or more accurately, had given him a carefully curated version of events that painted Gloria as a troublemaker and the whole situation as an unfortunate misunderstanding blown out of proportion by an overly protective grandmother. Matthews approached Gloria and Maya with the kind of practiced, sympathetic expression that administrators develop over years of dealing with upset parents. He'd already decided how this was going to go: a sincere apology, maybe a gift card to a local restaurant, a promise to look into things, and then everyone would move on. Conflict avoided, crisis managed, another day survived. "Mrs. Washington, Maya," he said, his voice warm and conciliatory, "I understand there was an incident today at lunch. I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding, and I want to assure you that we take food safety very seriously at Lincoln High." Gloria let him finish his opening speech before she responded. When she did, her voice was polite but absolutely unyielding. "My granddaughter was served moldy food and then humiliated when she tried to address it. This isn't a misunderstanding, Principal Matthews. This is negligence. And I'd like to know what you're going to do about it." Matthews shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't following his script. He glanced at Clark, who gave a subtle shake of his head, a signal that meant this grandmother wasn't going to be easily placated. Of course," Matthews said, his tone still conciliatory. "I want to apologize on behalf of the school. This should never have happened. What I'm thinking is that we could transfer Maya to a different lunch period, perhaps." Gloria held up one hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "So your solution is to move the victim, not address the perpetrator?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Matthews blinked, clearly not having considered how his suggestion would sound when phrased that way. Before he could formulate a response, Maya spoke. She'd been quiet throughout most of this confrontation, still processing everything, but now her voice cut through the tension, softer than her grandmother's but steady and clear. Principal Matthews, this wasn't just about today. Everyone turned to look at her. This has been happening all year. The way Mrs. Collins looks at me and students who look like me. The way her whole face changes when we come through the line. The portions she gives us compared to other students. The comments under her breath. The energy is just different. Maya's voice wavered slightly, but she pushed through. In September, she told me I should be grateful for the food because not everyone has access to meals like this. In October, she gave me a half portion of pasta, and when I asked for a normal serving, she said I was being greedy. Last month, she asked if I was sure I needed seconds when I was getting my first plate. It's been constant, Principal Matthews. Today with the moldy bread wasn't a one-time thing. It was just the first time it was impossible to ignore. The cafeteria had gone quiet. Other students nearby who'd been pretending not to listen were now openly watching. Some were nodding, they'd seen it too, experienced it themselves, normalized it because what else could they do? Matthews looked genuinely uncomfortable now. This wasn't a simple complaint he could smooth over with administrative platitudes. Well, he said slowly, perhaps what we need is some cultural sensitivity training for our cafeteria staff. Help everyone understand different perspectives, build bridges. Gloria cut him off again. Cultural sensitivity training for food poisoning? Her voice was sharp now, her patience for bureaucratic doublespeak exhausted. Principal Matthews, my granddaughter was served contaminated food. This isn't about sensitivity. This is about safety, basic human dignity, and the fact that you have an employee who has apparently been treating students differently based on how they look for over a decade. Before Matthews could respond, the cafeteria doors opened and Dr. Raymond Scott walked in. He was a distinguished-looking black man in his late 60s, wearing a suit that suggested he'd come directly from somewhere important. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere. This wasn't just a grandmother complaining anymore. This was a school board member, and his expression suggested he was not pleased. David, he said, his voice carrying across the cafeteria, I'm here as a concerned board member. I'd like a full briefing on this situation. Matthews's face went pale. The thing about conflict-averse administrators is that they're not afraid of parents. They deal with upset parents all the time. But board members are different. Board members can affect careers, budgets, and reputations. Suddenly, this wasn't a problem Matthews could make disappear quietly. Dr. Scott, of course, Matthews stammered. Perhaps we should move this to my office. But before they could move anywhere, the front doors of the school opened again. Janet Price walked in with 2 other health inspectors, all of them carrying official clipboards and wearing County Health Department identification badges. Gloria allowed herself a small smile. At 4:03 p.m., the real investigation began. Janet Price was all business now, no trace of the friendly woman who'd been on the phone with Gloria earlier. Clark tried to delay them at the cafeteria entrance, citing some policy about scheduled inspections and advance notice, but Gloria stepped forward. These inspectors are here to investigate a food safety complaint. They have every legal right to conduct a surprise inspection, and any attempt to delay or obstruct them could be considered interference with a health investigation. Clark looked to Matthews for support, but the principal just nodded weakly. He knew when he was beaten. Janet and her team entered the cafeteria kitchen with Maria nervously leading the way. The head lunch lady had been watching everything unfold, and something in her had shifted. Maybe it was seeing Gloria stand up to Clark, or maybe it was Maya's brave testimony, or maybe it was just years of suppressed guilt finally bubbling to the surface. Whatever the reason, Maria had decided she was done protecting Barbara Collins. The walk-in cooler, Maria said quietly, pointing to the large refrigeration unit. Temperature's been off for 3 days. Barbara said not to report it, said maintenance would make a big deal out of nothing. Janet's eyes narrowed. She pulled out a digital thermometer and checked the cooler. 45 degrees Fahrenheit. The safe temperature for food storage is 40 degrees or below. This cooler had been in the danger zone for 72 hours. But that was just the beginning. The inspection team spread out, checking expiration dates, examining storage practices, testing temperatures. They found expired milk from 2 weeks ago still in service. They found raw meat stored above ready-to-eat foods, creating cross-contamination risks. They found several plates of food, sandwiches and bread products, with visible mold that hadn't been disposed of. The same moldy bread Maya had been served, along with at least 6 other contaminated items. Barbara Collins appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face flushed with anger and something else, fear. "This is a setup," she shouted, her voice shrill. "Someone planted this. Those students, they did this to get me in trouble." Janet Price turned slowly to face her, and her expression was colder than the malfunctioning walk-in cooler. "Ma'am," she said, her voice professionally deadly, "these expiration dates are from 2 weeks ago. This cooler hasn't been at proper temperature in days, according to the digital log. And you're suggesting that students somehow manipulated time and temperature controls to frame you." The absurdity of Barbara's claim hung in the air. But Janet wasn't done. "Furthermore, we have documentation of 3 previous complaints about portion discrimination and unprofessional conduct. This isn't about one bad day. This is about systemic negligence and hostile treatment of students. Have you or someone you know ever experienced discrimination in an unexpected place like a school cafeteria? Share your story in the comments. Your experience matters." That was when the dam broke. The other cafeteria workers who'd been watching from the sides suddenly found their voices. Carmen, a quiet woman in her 40s who'd worked there for 8 years, spoke up first. "Barbara threatened our jobs if we reported anything. She said we'd all be fired for making trouble, that the administration would believe her over us." Another worker, an older man named Robert, nodded vigorously. "She threw away the temperature logs last week when they showed the cooler was malfunctioning. Told us to just write in fake numbers. I didn't want to do it, but I've got 2 kids in college." His voice broke. "I needed this job." One by one they shared their stories. Years of being bullied into silence, of watching Barbara treat certain students poorly, of knowing something was wrong but feeling powerless to stop it. The toxic culture she'd created hadn't just affected students. It had poisoned the entire cafeteria operation. Janet's team continued documenting violations. Improper hand-washing stations. Missing temperature logs. Inadequate cleaning protocols. The list grew longer and longer. Finally, at 4:47 p.m., Janet Price turned to Principal Matthews with an expression that said everything before she even spoke. "Principal Matthews, based on what we've found today, I'm shutting down this cafeteria effective immediately until all violations are corrected. This is a critical food safety situation. The kitchen will remain closed until you can demonstrate full compliance with health codes and pass a follow-up inspection." The words hit Matthews like a physical blow. Lincoln High had 1,200 students. It was 4:47 on a Wednesday afternoon. Tomorrow was Thursday. There would be no lunch service for 1,200 students. The logistical nightmare was staggering. He'd need to notify parents, arrange alternatives, deal with the district office, handle the media that would inevitably hear about this, and figure out how to feed over 1,000 teenagers with less than 18 hours notice. But more than the logistics, there was the reality of what this meant. A health department shutdown wasn't something you could spin or hide. This would be public record. The district would have to be notified immediately. The school board would demand answers. And there, standing in his cafeteria, was a board member who'd already witnessed much of the disaster firsthand. Matthews felt his carefully managed, conflict-avoiding world crumbling around him. This wasn't going away quietly. This wasn't going to be smoothed over with a policy change and a memo. This was a full-blown crisis, and it had been building right under his nose for years while he'd been too busy avoiding conflict to notice. Gloria Washington stood with her arm around Maya's shoulders, watching as health inspectors tagged equipment and photographed violations. Her face showed no triumph, only grim satisfaction. She hadn't wanted this fight, but she'd never walked away from one when her family was involved. And as the full scope of the cafeteria's failures came to light, one thing became crystal clear. If Maya hadn't said something, if Gloria hadn't pushed back, if those students hadn't gathered evidence, this would have continued. More students would have been served contaminated food. More kids would have been treated as less than. The system was content to ignore the problem as long as it stayed quiet. But it wasn't quiet anymore. If you're finding value in this deep dive into Maya's story and the fight for dignity and justice, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're exploring more real-world stories that expose uncomfortable truths and celebrate everyday heroes. Don't miss what comes next. The investigation had revealed something far bigger than one moldy sandwich. It had exposed a culture of negligence, discrimination, and institutional failure. And now, with the cafeteria shut down and violations documented, there was no going back. The consequences were just beginning. At 4:52 p.m., Principal David Matthews made a phone call he'd spent his entire administrative career trying to avoid. His hands were shaking slightly as he dialed the district superintendent's office. His voice tight as he explained that they had a situation requiring an emergency meeting. Within minutes, his conference room was filling up with people who all looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The assistant principals, the head of facilities, Dr. Raymond Scott from the school board, and Janet Price, who'd agreed to stay to present her findings. But there was one person Matthews hadn't expected to see walking through his conference room door: Gloria Washington. And she wasn't alone. Tom Chin, Maya's friend Tyler's father and a civil rights attorney with a downtown firm, walked in beside her, carrying a leather briefcase that somehow made the whole situation feel even more serious. "Mrs. Washington," Matthews said, his voice strained, "this is an administrative meeting." Gloria cut him off with the kind of polite firmness that left no room for argument. "Principal Matthews, this administrative meeting is about my granddaughter and involves serious allegations of discrimination and negligence. I have every right to be here, and Mr. Chin is here as a witness and advisor. Unless you'd like to add, excluding the victim's family from proceedings to the list of problems we're addressing today." Matthews looked to Clark for support, but the assistant principal was staring at Tom Chin with an expression that suggested he understood exactly how bad this had become. Chin wasn't just any parent, he was a lawyer who specialized in civil rights cases, and his presence in that room transformed this from an internal school matter into something with potentially serious legal implications. "Of course," Matthews said weakly, gesturing to empty chairs. "Please sit down." The meeting began with Janet Price laying out her findings in clinical, devastating detail. Multiple critical violations. Systemic failures. Evidence of deliberate concealment. The cooler that had been malfunctioning for 3 days. The expired food that should have been thrown away weeks ago. The temperature logs that had been falsified. Every fact she presented felt like another nail in a coffin. But it was when they got to the discrimination complaints that the room's atmosphere truly changed. Clark, who'd been sitting stiffly throughout Janet's presentation, suddenly leaned forward. "Now wait a minute," he said, his voice defensive. "Barbara Henderson has been with this school for 18 years without incident. She's a dedicated employee who—" Tom Chin interrupted him, and his voice had that particular quality that lawyers develop: calm, precise, and absolutely lethal. "Actually, Mr. Clark, there have been incidents. Multiple incidents. They were just systematically ignored." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder that looked disturbingly thick. "I spent the last 2 hours making phone calls and sending emails. It's remarkable what parents remember when they know someone's actually listening." "May I?" Matthews nodded weakly. Chin began laying out documents on the conference table like he was dealing cards. Email after email. Complaint after complaint. Some were formal, sent to the school's official complaint address. Others were informal, sent to teachers or counselors. All of them had one thing in common: they described problems with Barbara Henderson's treatment of students, particularly students of color. September 2019, Chin read from one email. Parent reports that cafeteria worker made comment about her son needing to learn gratitude when he asked for a full portion. Complaint sent to Assistant Principal Clark. Response? He looked up, his eyes finding Clark across the table. No response. Complaint was never logged. He picked up another document. March 2021. Student reports to school counselor that cafeteria worker consistently gives smaller portions and makes uncomfortable comments. Counselor forwards concern to administration. Response: Clark sends email saying, student seems oversensitive to normal cafeteria procedures. Another document. October 2022. Parent calls to complain that daughter was given spoiled milk, and when she tried to exchange it, cafeteria worker berated her in front of other students. Call logged by front office. Forwarded to Clark. No follow-up recorded. Chin kept going. The pile of ignored complaints grew. Some were minor, could have been personality conflicts or misunderstandings. But together they formed a pattern that was impossible to dismiss. And every single one had been stopped at Clark's desk, never reaching Matthews, never investigated, never addressed. Dr. Scott's expression grew darker with each document. Finally he held up a hand. How many complaints are we talking about, Mr. Chin? 23, Chin said quietly. Over the past 8 years. 23 documented complaints about Barbara Henderson's treatment of students. And that's just what I could find in 3 hours of phone calls. I imagine a thorough investigation will uncover more. The room went silent. 23 complaints. 23 times a parent or student or teacher had raised a red flag, and 23 times the flag had been ignored. Matthews looked like he might be sick. He'd had no idea, genuinely no idea, that this pattern existed because Clark had made sure he never saw it. They reviewed the student testimonies next. Maya's friends had done thorough work, collecting written statements from 15 current students, all describing similar experiences. The videos were played on Matthews's laptop, the sound tinny through the small speakers but the content unmistakable. Barbara's face as she served Maya. Her tone when she said, "You people." The casual cruelty in her dismissal. Every person in that room watched in uncomfortable silence. At 5:27 p.m., Barbara Henderson was called into the conference room. She entered with her head high, defiant, her body language screaming that she was the victim here, not Maya Washington. She sat in the chair Matthews indicated with the air of someone who'd been through administrative meetings before and knew she'd survive this one too. She'd been here 18 years. She had seniority. She had Clark protecting her. This would blow over like everything else. "Mrs. Henderson," Matthews began, his voice formal, "we're conducting an investigation into today's incident and related matters." Barbara interrupted him with the confidence of someone who didn't yet understand how much trouble she was in. "Principal Matthews, I've dedicated my life to this school. 18 years of service, feeding thousands of students, never taking a sick day. These accusations are ridiculous. One spoiled girl with an entitled grandmother has decided to make trouble, and suddenly my entire career is in question?" Her voice was indignant, wounded, like she was the one who'd been wronged. Dr. Scott leaned forward, his voice cutting through her protest like a scalpel. "Mrs. Henderson, we have you on video making discriminatory comments and serving contaminated food to a student. This isn't about accusations. This is about documented facts." Barbara's face flushed. That girl was disrespectful. Kids these days don't appreciate anything. They don't say thank you, they act entitled to everything. She was digging herself deeper with every word, but she couldn't seem to stop. Years of barely suppressed resentment were pouring out now. "Do you know what it's like dealing with these students every day? The attitude, the demands, the complete lack of gratitude." Gloria Washington, who'd been sitting quietly throughout the meeting, spoke then. Her voice was calm, measured, but it carried weight that made everyone turn to look at her. "That girl is my granddaughter. And she's shown more grace in this situation than you've shown in 18 years of employment." The words landed like stones in still water. Barbara's mouth opened and closed, but Gloria wasn't done. "Maya said thank you. She's polite, she's respectful, she works hard. But even if she wasn't, even if she was the rudest, most difficult student in this school, she would still deserve to be fed safe, uncontaminated food. She would still deserve to be treated with basic human dignity. Those aren't privileges you grant to students who meet your personal standards of behavior. Those are rights." Barbara tried to deflect, turning to Matthews. "You don't know what it's like dealing with these students every single day, the constant." Dr. Scott interrupted her, and his voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "These students? Which students exactly, Mrs. Henderson? Please clarify what you mean by these students." The question hung in the air like a trap. Barbara suddenly realized what she'd said, how it sounded, the hole she'd dug for herself. Her mouth snapped shut. The silence stretched out, damning in its completeness. She had no answer that wouldn't confirm exactly what everyone in that room was thinking. Clark tried to intervene, tried to pull Barbara back from the edge. "I think what Mrs. Henderson is trying to say is that cafeteria work is stressful and sometimes..." But Dr. Scott turned on him with the full force of his authority, and Clark actually flinched. "How many complaints came across your desk that you dismissed, Mr. Clark?" Scott's voice was quiet, but there was fury underneath it. "How many parents called or emailed about Mrs. Henderson's treatment of their children? How many students came to you for help? And how many times did you decide that protecting your friend was more important than protecting the students in your care?" Clark's face went white. He opened his mouth to respond, but Dr. Scott wasn't done. "Because what we have here isn't just one employee with poor judgment. What we have is a systematic cover-up of discriminatory behavior. We have an administrator who chose friendship over duty, who chose comfort over justice, and who let this situation fester for years until it exploded in the worst possible way." The deeper pattern was emerging now, like a body floating to the surface of dark water. The investigation had revealed that Clark and Barbara were friends. Not just colleagues but actual friends who had lunch together, who carpooled sometimes, who'd worked together for over a decade. And that friendship had created a shield around Barbara that made her untouchable. Complaints that should have gone to Matthews had been intercepted. Issues that should have been investigated had been dismissed. Students who tried to speak up had been labeled as troublemakers or oversensitive. This story shows why speaking up matters, even when systems are designed to silence you. If you believe in shining light on injustice and holding institutions accountable, subscribe to this channel. We're committed to telling stories that matter. Other staff members, emboldened by the health department's findings and the presence of a board member, started coming forward. A gym teacher admitted that Barbara had made racist comments in the staff lounge regularly. Jokes about students' names, complaints about certain kinds of families, comments that everyone had heard but no one had reported because Barbara was protected. A counselor revealed that 3 students had come to her office in tears last year after interactions with Barbara, but when she'd reported it to Clark, he told her the students were being dramatic, and to let it go. The pattern was clear and damning. Barbara hadn't just treated Maya poorly. She'd been targeting specific students systematically for years. Maya wasn't the first victim, she was just the first one with video evidence that couldn't be ignored, the first one with a grandmother who refused to accept bureaucratic dismissal, the first one whose story had broken through the wall of institutional protection. At 5:49 p.m., Matthews's phone rang. It was the district representative, and her voice was tight with controlled panic. The media had picked up the story. Local news vans were parked outside the school. A hashtag Lincoln High Justice, was trending locally on social media. Parents were calling the district office demanding answers. Board members were texting Dr. Scott asking what the hell was happening. This wasn't a contained situation anymore. This was a public crisis, and how the school handled the next few minutes would determine whether Matthews kept his job, whether the school's reputation survived, whether the district faced lawsuits. Dr. Scott made it crystal clear. "David," he said, using Matthews's first name deliberately, stripping away the formal titles, "how you handle this in the next few minutes will define your career. You can do the right thing now, or you can try to protect people who don't deserve protection and watch everything burn down around you. Your choice." Matthews looked around the room, at the health inspector's damning reports, at the pile of ignored complaints, at Barbara Henderson who still seemed to think she was the victim, at Clark who'd betrayed his responsibilities, at Gloria Washington sitting quietly with her attorney. The decision wasn't really a decision at all. There was only one path forward that didn't end in complete disaster. At 5:53 p.m., Principal David Matthews made the call. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, his voice heavy, "effective immediately, your employment with Lincoln High School is terminated. You'll be escorted from campus today, and you'll receive official termination paperwork within 48 hours. Barbara's face went from defiant to shocked to furious in the span of seconds. "You can't, I have 18 years, this is wrongful termination." But Matthews kept talking, his voice growing stronger as he found his spine. "Mr. Clark, you are placed on administrative leave effective immediately pending a full investigation into your handling of student complaints and discrimination reports. You're to surrender your keys and badge and leave campus today." Clark stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "This is, I've been here, you can't just," but he could see in Matthews's face that it was done. The decision was made. Dr. Scott was nodding approval. The district supported this. Fighting would only make things worse. Matthews continued, and with each announcement, the room felt like it was being cleansed of poison. "There will be a full review of all disciplinary and complaint procedures. An external equity audit will be performed by a third-party organization. Maya Washington's record will be cleared completely of today's incident, and a formal written apology from the school will be issued to her and her family." Security was called. 2 officers arrived at the conference room door. Barbara Henderson, finally understanding that this was real, that she was actually being fired, that 18 years of protection had evaporated in a single afternoon, showed emotion for the first time. But it wasn't remorse or shame. It was anger and self-pity. Tears streamed down her face as she was escorted from the conference room, but her voice was bitter and accusing. As they walked past Gloria in the hallway, Barbara stopped, pulling against the security officer's gentle grip. She turned to face Gloria, her face blotchy with tears and rage. "You've ruined my life over one mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "One bad day and you've destroyed everything I've built here." Gloria Washington looked at this woman who'd tormented her granddaughter, who'd spent years treating children cruelly, who'd been protected and enabled and allowed to harm students over and over again. She stood up, meeting Barbara's eyes with perfect calm. "No ma'am," Gloria said quietly. "You ruined your own life through years of cruelty and discrimination. My granddaughter just brought it to light. She didn't create this situation, you did. Every time you served a smaller portion, every time you made a dismissive comment, every time you treated a child as less than because of how they looked. You built this over 18 years. Maya just made sure someone finally paid attention." Barbara had no response to that. What could she say? The security officers led her away, her footsteps echoing down the hallway like a funeral march. Clark, watching from the conference room doorway, realized her position was equally untenable. The investigation would uncover everything, all the ignored complaints, all the dismissed concerns, all the times she'd chosen friendship over duty. She could go on administrative leave and fight, drag this out for months, but the ending was inevitable. Better to control at least one thing in this disaster. Principal Matthews, Clark said, her voice hollow, I resign. Effective immediately. She pulled her keys and badge from her pocket, placed them on the conference table with a sharp click and walked out. No security escort needed. Just a quiet exit from a career that had ended the moment she decided protecting Barbara Henderson was more important than protecting students. Have you ever witnessed someone in power protect the wrong person, and what did it cost? Drop your thoughts in the comments. These conversations matter. Students and staff who'd been hovering in hallways and classrooms, sensing something major was happening, crowded near windows to watch. They saw Barbara Henderson, the cafeteria worker who'd seemed untouchable for so many years, being escorted across the parking lot to her car. They saw her get in, sit there for a long moment with her hands on the steering wheel, and then drive off campus for the last time. There was no cheering, no celebration. Just a collective exhale, like the building itself was releasing tension it had held for years. Back in the hallway outside Matthews's office, Maya Washington stood with her grandmother's arms around her. She'd been waiting, anxious and exhausted, while the adults decided her fate. When Gloria emerged from the conference room and told her it was over, truly over, with Barbara fired and Clark gone and everything changing, Maya didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired, overwhelmed, and strangely sad. She'd never wanted to be at the center of something like this. She just wanted lunch. But as her grandmother held her, as she felt the solid warmth and safety of that embrace, Maya understood something important. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't about winning or losing. Sometimes it's just about refusing to accept that cruelty is normal, that discrimination is tolerable, that your dignity is negotiable. She'd done that. With her grandmother's help, with her friends' support, with one video and one refusal to be silent, she'd done that. The hallway was quiet except for the distant sounds of the school day ending. Lockers slamming, voices calling goodbyes, the ordinary sounds of a Wednesday afternoon. But Lincoln High School wasn't the same place it had been that morning. Something had broken and been rebuilt in a single day. And standing in that hallway, grandmother and granddaughter together, they both knew that the hardest part was over. Whatever came next, they'd face it the same way they'd faced this, together, with dignity, and with an absolute refusal to accept anything less than what was right. By 6:15 p.m., as the winter sun was beginning to set over Lincoln High School, the parking lot had transformed into something resembling a media circus. 3 local news vans had set up, their satellite dishes extended like mechanical flowers reaching for the sky. Reporters with perfect hair and serious expressions were doing stand-ups in front of the school's main entrance, their camera operators framing shots to capture the iconic brick facade behind them. Students who'd stayed late either because they were involved in the incident or because they'd heard something big was happening, clustered in groups near the buses, watching the spectacle unfold. One reporter, a young woman from Channel 7, had corralled Marcus, Tyler, and Jasmine near the flagpole. Her microphone had a bright foam cover with the station logo, and she held it between them like she was conducting the world's most important interview. Marcus, who'd been quiet and observant throughout most of the day's drama, suddenly found his voice when asked what had happened. This isn't just about one cafeteria worker or one incident, he said, his words tumbling out with the passion of someone who'd been thinking about this for a long time. This is about systemic issues that exist in schools everywhere. It's about how students, especially students of color, are treated differently, held to different standards, given less benefit of the doubt. And it's about what happens when we finally have the power to document it, to share it, to make people pay attention who've been ignoring us for years. The reporter nodded, scribbling notes even though the camera was recording everything. She turned to Jasmine next, asking about Maya, about their friendship, about what motivated them to get involved. Jasmine's answer was simpler but no less powerful. Maya's my best friend. When someone hurts your friend, you don't just stand there and watch. You do something. And I think that's what today was really about, people deciding to do something instead of just accepting that this is how things are. We stood up for what's right because nobody else was going to do it for us. The camera loved her earnestness, the way her eyes shone with conviction. This was the kind of sound bite that would play on the 11 o'clock news, that would get shared on social media, that would become part of the story people told about this day. Inside the building, Mr. Chin, Tom Chen's brother and a veteran teacher of 23 years, was being interviewed by a different reporter in the main hallway. He looked tired, like the weight of the day had physically pressed down on his shoulders, but when asked about his role in documenting the incident, his response cut to the heart of what education should be. Teachers have a responsibility to protect students. Not just physically but emotionally, psychologically, in terms of their dignity and their rights. When we see injustice happening in our buildings and we look away because it's uncomfortable or complicated or because we don't want to make waves, we're failing. Today, students had to do the job that adults should have been doing all along. That's not something to celebrate. That's something that should make every educator in this building deeply uncomfortable. His words would echo in staff meetings for months to come, an uncomfortable mirror held up to collective failures. Outside, near the cafeteria side entrance, Maria stood with her coat buttoned against the cold, speaking to a reporter from the local Spanish-language station. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady. For years I knew something was wrong. I watched things happen that I knew weren't right. But I was scared of losing my job, scared of making trouble, scared that no one would believe me over someone who'd been here so long. Maya gave me courage. This young girl, this brave girl, she stood up when I was too afraid to. She reminded me that staying silent makes you part of the problem. So I spoke up. And yes, I was terrified. But doing the right thing is more important than being comfortable. By 6:30, a black sedan pulled into the parking lot, moving with the kind of authority that suggested someone important had arrived. Dr. Helen Rodriguez, the district superintendent, stepped out wearing a navy suit and an expression that meant business. She'd been in emergency meetings since the moment the story broke, fielding calls from board members, working with district lawyers, coordinating crisis response. Now she was here to see the situation firsthand and, more importantly, to make promises. She met with Matthews, Dr. Scott, and Gloria Washington in the principal's office. Her message was clear and unequivocal. This incident had exposed systemic failures that went far beyond one school, and the district was committed to comprehensive reform. There would be equity audits at every school. There would be transparent complaint procedures with oversight. There would be mandatory training, real training, not the check-the-box kind. And there would be accountability. The immediate practical problems needed solving too. 1,200 students still needed lunch tomorrow. Dr. Rodriguez had already arranged for temporary food service. Local restaurants had been contracted to provide meals until the cafeteria could reopen. A new cafeteria manager would be hired, but this time there would be a student input committee involved in the selection process. Students would have a voice in choosing who fed them. It was a small thing but symbolically powerful. A recognition that students weren't just recipients of services but stakeholders in their own education. At 7:03 p.m., Maya was called to Principal Matthews's office. She walked in nervously, Gloria by her side, unsure what to expect. Matthews stood when they entered, a small gesture of respect that didn't go unnoticed. He gestured to chairs, waited for them to sit, and then did something that principals rarely do with students. He apologized. Not a bureaucratic, lawyer-approved statement, but a genuine, personal apology. Maya, I failed you. Not just today but for months before today. I created an environment where you didn't feel safe coming to me with problems. I made myself inaccessible. I was so focused on managing crises that I didn't see the crisis building right in front of me. His voice was heavy with regret. You shouldn't have had to fight this hard to be treated with basic dignity. That's on me. That's on every adult in this building who let you down. Maya, who'd been holding herself together through hours of tension, felt something crack inside her chest. She nodded, not quite trusting her voice. Matthews continued, outlining changes. An open-door policy, literally, where his office door would be open during lunch periods so students could walk in and talk. A student advisory council that would meet with administration monthly to raise concerns before they became crises. Anonymous reporting mechanisms with guaranteed follow-up. These weren't just promises meant to sound good in press releases. These were structural changes to ensure that what happened to Maya could never happen to another student without swift intervention. As Maya and Gloria prepared to leave Matthews's office, Dr. Raymond Scott caught them in the hallway. He pulled Maya aside, his expression warm and grandfatherly, and told her something that made tears spring to her eyes for the first time that day. Maya, I knew your mother in college. Did you know that? Maya shook her head. She knew Dr. Scott was a family friend, but not that he'd known her mother personally. We were in some of the same activist circles. Your mother organized protests, wrote for the campus newspaper, fought against injustice wherever she saw it. She had this fire in her, this absolute refusal to accept that things were just the way they are. He paused, his own eyes glistening. Today, watching you stand up for yourself and for other students who couldn't stand up, I saw your mother in you. That same fire, that same courage. She would be so proud. You stood up for justice just like she did. That was when Maya finally broke. The tears she'd been holding back all day, through the humiliation with Barbara, through the confrontation with Clark, through the investigation and the meetings and the cameras, finally spilled over. She cried not from sadness but from the overwhelming weight of everything, from grief for the mother she barely remembered, from pride that she'd made her mother proud even though she'd never know it. Gloria wrapped her arms around her granddaughter, and Dr. Scott squeezed her shoulder gently before walking away to give them privacy. 1 week later, Lincoln High School looked the same but felt fundamentally different. New cafeteria policies were posted in bright, professional displays near the lunch line, clear guidelines about portion sizes, about respectful treatment, about how to report concerns. Student feedback forms were available in multiple languages, with a locked suggestion box that was opened weekly by a rotating student committee. The symbolism mattered. Students could see that their voices would be heard. The cultural competency training that the district had promised wasn't the usual perfunctory workshop where people sat through a PowerPoint and called it progress. This was intensive, ongoing training led by outside experts, with follow-up sessions and accountability measures. Staff members who'd coasted through previous diversity trainings found themselves genuinely challenged to examine their biases, their assumptions, the small ways that prejudice manifests in daily interactions. Maria had been promoted to interim cafeteria manager. It wasn't just a reward for speaking up. She'd proven over years of service that she was organized, competent, and genuinely cared about the students. Now she had the authority to implement the changes she'd always wanted to make. The kitchen gleamed from the deep cleaning that had been required for the health department to lift the closure order. New temperature monitoring systems had been installed, new protocols established, new suppliers contracted for fresher food. Mr. Chin, Tom's brother, had been asked to lead a new student advocacy committee. His classroom became a weekly gathering place where students could raise concerns, discuss school climate issues, and work with administrators to address problems before they escalated. The committee had real power. Their recommendations went directly to the principal and the school board, and there was an expectation of response and action. Maya's photo essay, the one she'd been working on for the school competition, had taken on new meaning after the incident. She documented the entire day with her camera, capturing not just the confrontation but the aftermath, the community response, the slow process of change. The images were powerful. Barbara's face as she served the moldy bread, Gloria's calm dignity in the face of Clark's intimidation. Students gathered around phones watching the video spread, the health inspector's team examining violations, Barbara being escorted out, Maria crying with relief. The essay won first place in the state photography competition, but more than that, it became a historical document of how institutional change happens. Not easily, not cleanly, but through the courage of individuals who refuse to accept injustice. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the power of speaking up and the importance of standing together, hit that subscribe button. We're telling stories that matter, stories about real people creating real change. Join our community and be part of these conversations. Gloria attended the school board meeting where the new district-wide policies were formally approved. She sat in the audience, her presence a reminder of what happens when schools fail families, but also what happens when families refuse to be failed. When the board voted unanimously to approve comprehensive reforms, she nodded with quiet satisfaction. This was what justice looked like, not perfect, not immediate, but real and lasting. On the following Monday, exactly 1 week and 3 days after the incident, Maya walked into the cafeteria for lunch. Her stomach still tightened slightly as she entered. Muscle memory from trauma doesn't disappear overnight, but the space felt different. Maria was behind the serving line, and when she saw Maya, her face broke into a genuine smile. "Maya, good to see you, honey. We have fresh rolls today. Actually fresh, I picked them up from the bakery this morning myself. And the soup is homemade vegetable beef. What can I get you?" The warmth in her voice was authentic, the kind of warmth that makes institutional spaces feel human. Maya got her food and turned to see the new lunch lady that had been hired, a young black woman named Keisha who'd worked in school nutrition at 3 other districts and came with glowing recommendations. She was serving students with genuine friendliness, remembering names, making conversation, treating the lunch line not as a burden but as an opportunity to connect with kids. Maya carried her tray to the usual table where Jasmine, Marcus, and Tyler were already eating. They made room for her, the conversation flowing easily, and for the first time in over a week, lunch felt normal. They talked about homework and weekend plans and the upcoming basketball game. But then Jasmine paused, looking around the transformed cafeteria, and asked the question they'd all been thinking. Can you believe all this started with 1 plate of food? The question hung in the air, seeming almost absurd in its simplicity. How could something so small, a sandwich with moldy bread, have led to firings and policy changes and district-wide reforms? But Maya understood what her grandmother had been trying to tell her all along. It wasn't about the food, she said quietly, and everyone at the table turned to listen. It was about dignity. It was about the principle that every single person who walks through those doors deserves respect and safety and fairness, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. The food was just the thing that made it impossible to ignore anymore. The camera in Maya's mind, because she was always seeing the world through a photographer's lens now, pulled back. She saw the cafeteria full of diverse students, all eating together, all being served with respect. Black students and white students and Latino students and Asian students and students whose identities were complex and intersectional. Students in hijabs and students in hoodies and students in clothes that cost too much and students in clothes that had been worn too many times. All of them together, all of them equal in this space that had once been a place of subtle cruelty. Maya's internal voiceover, the one she'd used when she wrote about this in college essays and scholarship applications and eventually in the photojournalism pieces she'd create, crystallized. My grandmother always told me, silence protects the wrong people. That day I learned that speaking up, even when your voice shakes, even when you're scared, even when systems are designed to make you quiet, can change everything. Not just for you but for everyone who comes after. When was a moment you or someone you know spoke up when it would have been easier to stay silent? What changed because of it? Share your story in the comments. These moments of courage deserve to be remembered. She pulled out her camera and took a photo of the transformed cafeteria. The image captured everything: the diversity, the energy, the sense of community, the visible policy changes on the walls, Maria smiling behind the serving line. It was an image of hope, of progress, of what happens when people decide that enough is enough. It wasn't a perfect image of a perfect place. Lincoln High still had problems, still had work to do, still had a long journey ahead toward true equity. But it was better. Measurably, documentably better. And that mattered. The end title cards that would appear if this were a documentary would tell the rest of the story in clean, factual statements. Following this incident, Lincoln High implemented comprehensive equity training for all staff. Not token training but sustained, meaningful education about bias, discrimination, and creating inclusive environments. Barbara Henderson did not seek employment in education again. The termination stayed on her record, and her story became a cautionary tale in school district HR departments about the cost of ignoring complaints. Maya Thompson received a full scholarship to study photojournalism at a prestigious university, with her photo essay about the cafeteria incident serving as the centerpiece of her application portfolio. And the final card, the one that would linger on screen as the music swelled and the credits began to roll, would say, "Sometimes justice takes years. Sometimes it takes one brave voice and one terrible plate of food." Because that was the truth of it. Social change isn't always the result of massive movements or famous leaders or dramatic confrontations that shake the foundations of society. Sometimes it's the result of a teenage girl who refused to eat moldy bread and accept humiliation. Sometimes it's a grandmother who knew her rights and wouldn't be intimidated. Sometimes it's friends who gathered evidence and teachers who chose students over comfort and health inspectors who did their jobs with integrity. Sometimes justice is as simple and as complicated as a 15-year-old girl saying, "This isn't right," and refusing to be silent. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. The cafeteria continued to buzz with conversation and laughter. Students came and went, getting their food, eating with friends, living their lives in a space that was now safer and more equitable because one person had the courage to speak up. Maya took another bite of her sandwich, fresh bread, properly stored ingredients served with respect, and smiled. It tasted like victory. Small, imperfect, hard-won victory. But victory nonetheless. And somewhere, in whatever place exists beyond this one, her mother was smiling too.